Good evening. Good evening. So, the history of oil in the Hermosa Beach it's not going down the rabbit hole. It's like going into an ant farm. So, we're going to try and summarize what's gone on for about the last 100 years in Hermosa. And also, this is pretty close, a few days away from the 10th anniversary of the vote on no in 2015 that I can see many faces in the room we're involved in.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I'm Ryan Basford. I'm the Program and Education Manager here at the Hermosa Beach Museum. Welcome. It's great to see you all. And thank you, Mark. Mark is a board member here who's worked a lot with me on the oil exhibit and presentation, so very happy and lucky to have him. So we're here today to talk about oil in Hermosa Beach. We've got this wonderful exhibit that Jamie Erickson, our director, and myself put together. If you get a chance, I highly encourage you to go through and take a look. As Mark said, this is an ant farm of a topic. Tons of little stories and ways to get lost in it. So to get a good through line of the story of oil in Hermosa Beach, you can go through that exhibit. The darker panels speak to developments directly here in Hermosa, and the lighter panels are panels that talk to the national level issues or some of the global level issues or state issues with oil. So that's something to bear in mind as you go through there afterwards. But this presentation is about organizing oil, so we'll look at some of the personalities and some of the more specific stories behind it. For, as Mark said, an ant farm of a topic, what better place to start talking about Hermosa oil than El Segundo in Venice Beach? So Hermosa's story with oil really starts in El Segundo, I would argue, as that's where the second El Segundo oil refinery in the state of California was established. With that being established in the early 1910s, the population of the South Bay shot up 243% with workers at that refinery. So not quite jobs in mining, or I guess not mining, but in drilling for oil, but jobs in refining the crude oil that's brought out. That would be different in Venice, as you can see in this picture here from 1929. So Venice at the time, part of Los Angeles, drilling is not allowed. However, a combination of factors lead to it looking like that by the middle of the summer in 1929. Those factors are exemptions that the city council was more than happy to hand out if royalties were going to be gained. Town lot drilling, meaning that anyone could let an oil company lease the space next to their home to set up a well, and that property owner would get royalties. And what was called the law of capture. So basically, as the mineral rights situation is being determined in the late early 1900s, they're saying, okay, we don't really have a precedent for capturing oil. We have a precedent for if somebody owns land and there's coal on it, they can mine that coal. We don't have a precedent for a big pool of oil. So not to get too far into the weeds on this, but they actually, the Supreme Court cited law having to do with hunting, in which a fox that someone was hunting ran onto someone else's land, and then there was a dispute as to whether it was the landowner or the hunter who had captured it that had a right to that fox. In that decision, it was decided that the hunter had the right to the fox. In the oil decision, it was decided that whoever extracts the oil has the right to sell it. So, you can imagine how that would be different when it's a shared resource. If this whole museum, everyone was sitting on a pool of oil that everyone shares, and whoever captures it gets a right to it, you can imagine everyone would want their well to start drilling the fastest and to put up as many wells as possible, which is exactly what happened in Venice, and you get that image. At the same time, a well was being established, a discovery well in the city yard in Hermosa Beach. So again, this is summer of 1929 and early 1930 that the Venice boom is happening. The first well in Hermosa, the Holston well number 1, was started in April of 1929 and didn't strike oil until 5 months later in August. So there's a 5-month period where they're not sure whether they're going to hit oil, they're not sure how profitable it's going to be, but they're watching property values and businesses in Venice decline. Venice, that was supposed to be this big tourist town and with these beautiful beachfront properties, starting to lose those two in favor of some people striking it rich on oil. There's a notable court case there to get into some of the personalities. An actor named Louis Stone actually owned beachfront property in Venice, sued the state saying that the state could not lease the tidelands, which was true under the law at the time, could not lease out the tidelands for oil drilling. He won that court case, so they couldn't drill offshore or directly on the beach where he was, but nonetheless, his fellow property owners had their own decisions to make, and those special exemptions were being passed out. So again, Hermosa's watching all of that happen in Venice while they're waiting to find out whether the well here is going to strike oil and potentially trigger a similar rush. So that leads to all sorts of questions about regulation. The mayor at the time is A.R. Holston, and he establishes that, or he and the city council at the time, but he's the leader there, establishes that there's going to be a $200 annual fee per well, and allows for some drilling. Again, that's while Venice is happening. So quickly, by July, he presents a petition saying, okay, we need a lot more restrictions on this. And the quote that he gives is that he wants to limit oil drilling to a restricted district which will not mar the beauty of Hermosa's finest residence districts. So he's afraid that a flood of new drilling requests is going to come in and suggests limiting it. That limitation does go through, but it prompts a bigger fight by November when competing petitions that you can see in the top right there, a bit blurry, but 229 signers opposing an extension of drilling, and I believe it was 66 in favor of extending drilling, come and begin a big argument. As it says, dispute arises in council as those petitions are presented. So what happens there, I want to make sure that I get this right and look at my notes. It's a vote on drilling in a 2-block stretch east of Hermosa Avenue and south of 11th Street running to the south city limits. Don't worry too much about remembering that. That is these 2 blocks here. So on the east of Hermosa Avenue, fairly close to the beach though. The petition against is presented by Judge Henry Beecher, who owns property in the area. And he, along with a lot of other residents of that area, want drilling to be limited. They say it's not guaranteed that we're going to make our money back, so we don't want to potentially tank the price of our homes, right? An attorney who's a Venice resident, actually, but owns some property in Hermosa, instead contends, well, wait, the last restriction was put in place by the city council. It needs to be put to a vote of the people. It's not acceptable that the people didn't have a voice in this. And that gets shut down. As that motion is denied, though, one councilman objects and interestingly kind of inverts the framing of the class issue that was happening in Venice. The argument in Venice was, and the sort of takeaway that became clear in Venice was that it's not fair to let a couple people potentially strike it rich and bring down the property value of everyone else's business and home around them. This councilman in Hermosa, interestingly, inverts that with the quote being, I say let them drill wherever they want to. The millionaires along the beachfront can afford to lose their property. The poor people need the money if there is any to be had from drilling oil. So an interesting sort of inversion of the consensus takeaway from Venice. There's a heated back and forth argument between him and Holston, who again had set that initial $200 annual fee per well, in which Holston argues that there hasn't been enough yield to even potentially justify more drilling. He says it hasn't brought in as much as a good Jersey cow would in the same period. To which, and as heated as I'd imagine a council meeting in the 30s can get, to which the other councilman says, well, it's good that we're trying to drill for oil instead of running a dairy farm there. And then he does actually get in some more jabs about it being your namesake well and your fault that there's drilling in the area to begin with. So some personal attacks are had there. Ultimately, drilling is restricted for the time being, and we'll go to a vote in 1932. Before I jump to that vote, though, I want to talk about the other factor, which is the Chamber of Commerce. So the Delray Improvement Association, a bit like a Chamber of Commerce type role up in Venice, they're strongly against oil drilling. They're linking with the Real Estate Board of Venice and several other chambers of commerce along the coast, arguing to prevent more leases for drilling near the beach. They bring all sorts of people forward to speak in the news, with one quoting, quote, "An old oil man said, 'All the revenue produced by oil development in the ocean will never recompense the people for the damage to adjacent property.'" So again, you can see the key values here being the beauty of the bay, so some environmentalist slant, but largely property value and business are the things driving these decisions, right? And the same is true for the Hermosa Chamber of Commerce at the time, which is representing business interests and real estate interests and pushing very hard to avoid further drilling. You can see that in the petition that they presented in 1932 there on the far right. "Protect your home, it's up to you. Vote yes to prohibit further drilling." That vote does pass, so further drilling is prohibited in Hermosa. The 6 wells that were already established were allowed to continue, but by a vote of about 70 to 30%, further drilling is prevented. The Chamber of Commerce very strongly said, "Let's acknowledge our mistake, wipe the slate clean, start again." Their words, "Kill the oil menace now and forever," in all caps, very dramatic rhetoric. Meanwhile, E.B. Mills, who's director of Westwood Oil Producers at the time, argues that the income to the city is valuable and admits that there's been low yield thus far and says, well, there's been low yield, so why not let people drill? They'll naturally limit themselves. Regardless, that fails. The 6 in operation continue. There's a struggle to shut down the multitude of wells with unpaid fees, it appears. That goes on for some time. I won't bore you with all the details there, but there's some precedent for the city and oil companies getting into some arguments, shall I say. Whether those dealings are fair, you can see Hermosa Beach oil deal clean. That's actually an article from the 50s, so we're jumping ahead a bit. But the reason that they would ask that are a whole debacle that happens in Huntington Beach just after this 1932 vote. So I'll run through it. Again, apologies for looking to my notes, but I want to get all the details right. The state of California had bans on leasing the tidelands fronting a city for oil companies that date back to 1921. Some local oil companies tried to get around that and were denied. They then tried to pass a proposition which would have given Huntington its own right to its own tidelands, like Hermosa has, like Long Beach has. The way that all of those tideland agreements work, I think there's something like 12 California cities that have them. The city itself has the rights to the tideland that were usually given sometime in the 1910s for the purpose of harbor and fishery development. So the understanding there was they weren't sure whether they really had mineral rights, but anything that they did was earmarked to be used for harbor development. So for, say, a new pier, for a harbor for shipping, which Hermosa wasn't going to be building at the time. Anything along those lines. But again, we're talking about Huntington now. So those local oil companies are arguing, well, Standard Oil has wells near the beach that are already semi-illicitly siphoning oil from the tidelands. And there were rumors flying around of bribes and lobbying from Standard Oil to the state and the governor. But they fail, and that was true, by the way. Standard Oil was semi-illicitly. I'm not a geologist, so I didn't fully understand that reading, but they were pulling oil from those tidelands. And the local companies, once that Proposition 11 to get Huntington its own right to the tidelands to allow them to drill fails, those local companies started illegally slant drilling, a new technology in 1932 from town lots. So they claimed to be drilling straight down. It was determined, nope, they were angling their drill and going out into the tidelands. Of course, that prompted a massive scandal by the late 1930s. Oil companies ultimately in the late 30s organized a lobby, took advantage of the state needing revenue during the Great Depression, bargained for a royalty deal, and made the payoffs to the state, continued drilling. That led to what we see here, continued organization. Not just the Shoreline Planning Association, but it's one of those sort of private precursors to the what would eventually be the California Coastal Commission. But they form and basically say, okay, all these chambers of commerce have been arguing nonstop about zoning and how we're going to handle this. We need a bigger body for the state of California to be able to handle it. So they focus not just on oil, but on the sewage issue, on erosion, on pollution, all these different levels. And ultimately, they, along with some others, pushed for a state share in oil revenue. It becomes a 70% share from Tideland's oil. All that is to say that in the 30s, you're looking at a multitude of motives and means of activism and action. Largely, we're seeing organization through chambers of commerce and petitions, with motives being real estate value, local businesses, and to some extent preserving the beauty of the beach. Not quite the same environmentalist perspective that we'll see later, but a variation of it. Meanwhile, others are thinking they might strike it rich directly or benefit indirectly from oil. And that's something to remember as we get into the 50s and later, because those means of activism will change. I won't go too far into the 50s, but just to set the stage for us, tideland drilling rights, as you can guess, were in flux with arguments both between the state and federal government, and then in some cases the state and the cities. If the city had tideland rights, what exactly could they use that oil money for? All those debates, whether they were linked just to the harbor. What ultimately ends up being offered to the city of Hermosa, which does own its own tideland rights, is a deal from Shell and Continental. For $8.6 million, those companies would get exclusive tideland drilling rights. For $2 million, they would get the city yard they would get to lease the city yard property that has a well on it. They say they're not going to drill from it, but there's a specter of onshore drilling there too, and potential slant drilling from that location as well. And that would be a 35-year lease at $100,000 per year. And just for holding a vote to overturn the 1932 ban on further drilling, the city council would get a $500,000 bonus. So just by holding a vote, regardless of which way it goes, they're getting $500,000. So the city council agrees to that. Ultimately, residents vote against drilling by about 56% to 44%, maintaining that ban. The groups that drove that vote were residential committees. Note that some of these are built specifically around the oil issue. So there were 2 that were for drilling and 9 against, but it's worth noting that, okay, now we're looking at 11 residential committees as opposed to just the Chamber of Commerce and some private interest groups. So a little bit more direct action from residents. The concerns are still mainly development, businesses, and real estate. The city does put together its own oil committee made up of officials and engineers, with some debate as to who could or couldn't be involved. There was one former councilman who was at the time working as an attorney for an oil company, so they decided that would be a conflict of interest and pushed them out. But the key issue that I want to draw attention here to is the increase in direct citizen organization as opposed to just organizations of private interest groups. And that's a great place for me to hand it off to some of those that were actually there. Not Mark himself, but Mark will take it from here.
Loved you as an anthill. So I'm going to segue right now and introduce Barbara Gill. So, Barbara is undoubtedly the oldest activist in the room. At 98 years young, back in the 50s, she led the effort for No on Oil in 1958. So, thought it'd be good for everybody to hear her perspective on what was going on at the time. You heard Ryan's background, but I wanted to let her tell her story in the way she wants to about what she thought was important at the time. A little hard to hear, and if you have questions, she'll be happy to take questions. But go ahead, Barbara.
Hi, everybody. Nice to hear you. Is it good? Yeah. Okay. So in 1957, at some time then, the city council had accepted $500,000 from the Shell and Continental Oil companies to drill, to put offshore islands out in front of Hermosa Beach and put oil wells in it and claim the oil that they said was out there. It was the extension of the Torrance Redondo oil field, and they claimed that it had gone over this far because there were a couple of wells here in Hermosa Beach itself. But anyway, my background is I went to UC Berkeley and I have a degree in mechanical engineering. And so, from an engineer's standpoint, I looked into it more carefully because I had really grown up in Southern California. I've been various places and had gone up and down the beaches. We had relatives. My parents lived in Pasadena when I was born, but my grandmother, who had come to California in 1900, had settled in Pasadena, but loved the ocean. She was from Michigan, and when Balboa was first developed, she bought one of the first lots on Balboa Island, and we'd go down there in the summertime, and so as a child, we would go down there as well. And so my dad was the manager of a J.J. Newberry store after he was married to my mother. He had been a pilot in the First World War. So they were married in 1922. And I was born in 1926, so I've been around a long time. But we would, my mother loved the beach because she had learned to do that as a child. And and then I had an aunt who later lived in San Diego, so we used to drive down there to go to Balboa or the different beaches. And from Pasadena, where my parents, we had lived in for about 6 months in Anaheim, and then it was transferred to a store in San Pedro. And my mother said, "San Pedro, drunken sailors." I know. The Navy was all out there, and the store was just up the street. And of course, you know, the people that have been on a ship for a long time, when they get out and their gimbaling is fouled up, and so they always thought they were drunken sailors walking up the street when they really weren't drunk at all. Just, if you've ever been on a boat for a long time, and if you have sailboats, you know what that's like. But anyway, I lived there from 1932 until 1939. And in fact, I was in the Long Beach earthquake at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Wow. So, but we would go to the beach. We called it Cabrillo because in those, we always called it San Pedro. And if you're from San Pedro, that's what you call it. But we would go down and go swimming at Cabrillo Beach because they had just finished the breakwater. It was a big L-shaped thing that went out. It's the original run. And it was made out of quarried stone, and they were maybe this high by that high, and all stacked up very, very organized. It wasn't just a bunch of rocks they dumped in to make the breakwater, which later they did. But and there was a lighthouse out at the end of it, because it was when you came from the harbor when you came from the ocean down there, you go in there. So anyway, and then in 1939, my dad was transferred to Torrance to the J.J. Newberry store there. And so we moved to Torrance, and I started going to the beach in Hermosa Beach. And so I have a long history of both sides of the bay of this South Bay area. And so we would go from Torrance to Hermosa Beach, and there was a picture up here earlier of the Hermosa Hotel, and we would always go to the beach at 14th Street. So it was right on the south side of the Hermosa Hotel. So I was pretty familiar with this age. I went to Torrance High and graduated in the February of 1943, and went to UC Berkeley, and go Bears, right? And it was during the war, and so I was there actually for equivalent of 5 years, because after about 3 years during the war, I said to my parents, gosh, all I do is take engineering classes, and I'd like to be a little more rounded. And so I took another year and took some philosophy and history and a few things other than just engineers. But anyway, when I was about to graduate, I was recruited by Northrop Aircraft, that Jack Northrop ran. And so I got a job down here. And my family was, this isn't much of an oil talk, it's supposed to be.
We're getting there.
It'll tell you how familiar I am with beaches. Oh, and by the way, my options in the mechanical engineering was fluid mechanics and thermodynamics.
We don't know Bernoulli's equation.
And so I was had on a body surf since a small child. My mother had taught me to body surf. And I remember going to Long Beach as a child, and the lifeguards would have these plywood planks on plywood boards sitting next to the lifeguard tower, and for 10 cents an hour, you could ride one of those. I mean, you could rent one of those and go out and try to ride the waves, and that was a lot of fun. But so anyway, where am I? Okay, so then my mother knew Buddy and Roy Stinnett. I didn't want to live. My parents had moved from Torrance. My dad had been transferred, and so I said, I always want to live at the beach. And so Bunny Stinnett was a friend, and she found a place for me to live here in Hermosa Beach. And so I've lived here ever since. 1949. And I rented an apartment that Bunny caught for me. After a few months, I'm living in a room with a kitchen privileges at a house at 1920 the Strand over the garage, and it was $30 a month, and I didn't have to pay any utilities. And so I lived there and went to my job and would ride my bikes on the Strand, and my husband's family had built a house at 1920, what's the address? Anyway, one house from the corner, there was one house next to where I was. Sorry. 7 o'clock reminder. Oh my USC, and I was a year older than he was, it turned out. And he came one day and knocked on my door. I really had only been introduced to him on the beach. And he said, I saw you riding the bike, and I thought maybe you'd like to go with me. I'm gonna go driving for lobster at the new breakwater in Redondo Beach. And we use flashlights and we catch lobster. And I said, oh, that sounds like fun. Well, after doing that, and the following weekend, we got surf mats from Buddy and Roy Stinnett, and the pier was condemned at that time, and you had no lifeguard to let you through the gates to walk out to the end of the pier. You threw the mat off and jumped in and rode waves in. So it was great. You didn't have to And after about 2 weeks, we thought, it would be fun to go for a bike ride in Europe. And we both had heard of people that did that and stayed in youth hostels. And I said, okay, well, we'd have to get married if we did that. And 9 months later, we were married. We both spent that's Don Gill, and we both worked for a year with our jobs, mine at Northrop Aircraft, and he working for various, because by then he had graduated from USC Pharmacy, and he quit his jobs, and we took off and spent 4 months riding bikes through Europe. And so when we came back, then my husband went into business with his dad, who had started the Gill drugstore with his mother in 1936. So now this is 1950, at the end of 1951. And so then I didn't work after that as a hired person, but I was the engineer behind the Gill system. When we ended up with a chain of drugstores and the Gill drug, if any of you remember any of those. And also we started the Antique Guild. So, within the old Ellman's bakery. Okay, but now before all the drugstores were happening in 1957, because I was very interested in the beach, we noticed that the city council had signed this contract with Shell and Continental Oil, and they were going to drill and put offshore islands out into the middle of the bay. And I had seen too much oil development going on in Torrance. The oil wells were between where we lived in downtown Torrance and the Redondo breakwater. We used to go out and climb on the old wooden derricks for fun. I knew how messy and smelly they were, and I said, we don't want to do that, and we don't want to put Tide Lands oil in there. They'll have a leak, and it'll all run in onto the beach, and we won't be able to use the ocean. We won't be able to surf. I might say by that time I started surfing on a board where we would go to Malibu Cove, and because we had my first surfboard weighed 80 pounds. I always had somebody help me carry it. Okay, but anyway, I found out that they needed to get approval of the people of Hermosa Beach, and they called an election for March of 1958, and I said, no way, Jose, are you going to do this? We don't need to have offshore islands with oil wells. And even as a child, I had seen Signal Hill, which looked exactly like picture you saw tonight with Venice. And I said, it ruins a town, and it'll just be a big mess. And so I had gathered some of the neighbors that I knew that lived along the Strand and had a meeting in my house, and I said, we've got to do something about this. We've got to get organized and fight this thing and explain to people what they're trying to do. We cannot do this. And so in finding that out, I was someone who was seeking the truth. And I said, what can we use to, other than the mess and the dirt and the extra oil that's going to ruin things, how can we show people that maybe that money isn't going to be able to be used by the people? Well, then, in looking at different things in Long Beach, they had set a wonderful example for us that I was able to find and share with the people that we were organizing this group. And the Queen Mary had been put in the Long Beach harbor. And I wondered about that, and I looked it up, and it turned out that as Ryan had said earlier, 12 cities along the state had been granted as trustees of their tidelands, and but for the purpose of a harbor, of harbors or fisheries. And so Redondo, who had oil, I hadn't started drilling yet when we did this, but we knew that they were probably going to be able to drill in their tidelands. But anyway, it turned out that the reason that the Queen Mary was over in Long Beach was that they had one of the largest, or the largest oil discovery in the United States in Long Beach and Wilmington. And so they had drilled so much oil there that later it didn't, after they drilled a lot, the land sank 30 feet down, and then they had to pump salt water or fresh water in to elevate the sand again. I looked into why the Queen Mary was there. Well, what had happened is that the city of Long Beach had gained a lot of premiums for every barrel of all oil that had been pumped out of their tidelands. And it only took one person to sue and said, this money does not belong to you. The state, when they granted the money to people, it had it belong beyond the high tide line, up to 3 miles, belonged to everybody in the state of California.
And George slapped us on the side of the head a number of times and said enough. And there was Mike Collins and his wife Mary Campbell. There were the Binders, not allowed to use his first name because he never goes by his first name. And then there was Kevin Sousa and his wife Patty. There were the Fred Fiedel. And there were just so many people that were coming. And we were trying to find our footing. And then one night, my husband and I were watching a city council meeting, and this woman came at the end of the evening, and she just reamed them up one side and down the other about how poorly they had posted all the information on the city website. And her name was Stacy Armato. And my husband and I looked at each other and were like, okay, this person knows what they're doing. So I don't know who it is. I can't remember who takes responsibility for contacting her, but a week later, we met at our house again at this wonderful kitchen table, and it was just obvious that she had the voice, she had the talent to speak, and that was after George went and interviewed her. And he said, she not only has I'm sorry, I'm going to get you in trouble with this. She not only has the brains and the brawn and the voice, but she also has the looks. And Stacy came, and then we started to settle in. We kind of found our footing, and it was obvious that we needed to stop just chatting, that we needed to do. And I believe it was George's idea that we had a steering committee, and we had to relinquish power to them. They were the ones that were going to find the map. We were going to draw the map, and we were going to have to figure it out together. And again, people were coming and going, and I am a big, big believer that if you truly, truly believe in something, whatever it is, it can be, something about building a new hotel, or starting a new group here in Hermosa, or building a new city hall. If you have a vision and you really believe in it, you can do almost anything. And I will be forever grateful to the steering committee. They met different times, and they were able to give us the roadmap. And then it came back to the kitchen table, and we needed people to step up and be a voice. And I was very, very shy, and not too sure that I had a voice, but I had the time. I ran a small business out of my home. My children were getting older and didn't need me as much. My husband had a long commute down to Orange County, and so I took it upon myself to what I would call, I carried the bucket. George and Stacy and Mike and Kevin were the voices, and I walked half a pace behind them. And we reached out to people like the Baccaels. We reached out and found a lot of people to help us. Barbara was one of them. Stacy and I went to Barbara's house. She had boxes of information, and I just knew, oh my God, I dropped out of college. I'm going to have to start this all over again. And the amount of information that Barbara shared with us showed us the amount of work that we were going to have to do. We were going to have to be committed. And we found people. Someone would say, well, I really can't give you all the time. And Stacy would say, well, what can you do? Well, I'm a lawyer. I can help you with the legalese. And someone else would say, well, I'm an artist, and I can come up with the artwork. Other people were in marketing. Someone else was running our Facebook. And we just, again, if you truly, truly believe in your mission, you can make it work. And with about $150,000 to E&B's, that says $1 million. I think it was 1.5. But we were able to get the message out, and we had to be perfect. We couldn't make mistakes. We didn't have the luxury of sending out more flyers. Every flyer cost thousands of dollars. And we walked, we knocked on doors. I met amazing people. At that point, that's when I met so many people, Carol, who reminded me of past fights. Our fight had a poison pill where we were asking people to vote to charge them to pay over $13 million, $17 million. But again, we walked 5 years that fight took, and then look at the return of how many people came together. That was an amazing amount of, I think it was 72% of the people voted. And it was just, it was an amazing moment that was brought to us by people that were forward thinkers a long time ago. And I'll say it again, George, if you weren't there, I think we would have failed. And I will be forever grateful for your guidance. And I treasure your friendship. That I treasure your honesty. I think I still have a bruise on the side of my head a couple of times. So, but I challenge all of you. I'm sorry there aren't younger people here. I'd like to see Leadership Hermosa bring some people down here to see what it is we did, because we're all getting older, and we're all looking for some new voices. So if you have some new voices, maybe you can ask them to participate. Because, and I did forget one thing. This past council bought those oil rights. This isn't going to happen again, and we should be grateful for that. But we also need to know that history repeats itself. So future councils might make mistakes, not because they don't care, but because they might make a mistake. But I challenge us all to find some new voices. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So we're getting close to the end here. Yeah, it was probably one of the most galvanizing efforts for the community that I think will ever happen in my lifetime. I hope we don't have to galvanize against something again. It was really brought the community together in a big way. Here's some pictures of what it looked like. I think that was Betsy Ryan's house in the upper left corner. People were signing on oil and giving comments, and we had these organizations, these meetings, and people would get together and rally. It was just a lot of community effort. I think that's a great picture of the surfer inside a tube. And Michael Keegan, Manhattan Beach, or Hermosa resident, that's his bread and bagel up on the upper right corner there. We met at his place at night and organized. And there was just a lot of organization that went on, and a lot of good times, a lot of friendships were made. It was a great effort. And then there was the vote. And I bought this painting at one of the fundraisers, and it was 3 March 2015, almost 10 years ago. We voted I didn't vote, I live in Manhattan Beach, 3799 to 1016 against drilling, so like a 80-20. And like Barbara said, it was a little bit of a poison pill because the city had to get a 20-year bond to pay off EMB, but we knew that wasn't going to be a problem for the city of Hermosa Beach with property taxes and everything to take care of it. I wanted to end with a video that I found that was narrated by the late, great Kevin Sousa. You want to pop it in?
Sure. Thank you. As I get this pulled up, one point that I want to draw attention to is remembering where we started with chambers of commerce, setting petitions in the newspaper, some of that top-down style of drive against oil into what really is grassroots, bottom-up, very citizen-driven activism like this, culminating in as big a production as what you're about to see.
Is the day that we decide. The oil driller has told us that drilling is clean, healthy, and safe. That we will not hear it, we will not smell it, we will not see it. The driller wants us to trust them. Today is the day that we will protect what is ours. We will protect our ocean. We will protect our lifestyle. We will protect our children. Today is the day we will take care of our neighbors. We will take care of our community. We will take care of our bay. Today is the day that we as a community unite. Today we will go out and vote no on Measure O. Keep Hermosa, Hermosa. Today is our day.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I know it's a deep project, and but the culmination is here, and I think we should all feel very good for being able to celebrate 10 years of defeating oil in Hermosa. Before we break, any questions? It's been a long night. One question over there, Cheryl?
Ms. Guild was talking about the royalties had to be used in the coastal region. And
Yes.
So later in the 80s and really like the 60s, those royalties could be used anywhere? Because they were talking about everything like.
I don't know all the legalities, but it's basically oil that's taken outside the timelines is shared with the state and can be used by the community for things along the coast, like.
Within the, like 2 mile?
I'm not sure exactly, but like we could have done pier renovation or breakwaters or build a harbor, that type of
So
thing.
they have the technology to say like, oh yeah, we took this much out
Oh,
of this line.
absolutely. Yeah, when they drill, I'm an oil baron, I get a $10 to $15 royalty check a year from a well in El Segundo on my property there. And it's taxable too. And my parents' house I inherited is about a mile the way the crow flies from the oil well. And I get a fraction of that. So they have a formula to pay people royalties from wells.
After all of that, did they ever determine if there was any significant amount of oil under the ground in Hermosa?
I think Mark Twain said it best. He says a gold or silver mine is a hole in the ground with a liar on top. So it would remain to have been seen. But if you look at the map back here and the way the oil field ran, it starts down in Long Beach, goes through Torrance. Torrance had hundreds of oil wells, and I think it kind of fades out here. So I don't think it would ever have been a big producing area. Now, Redondo did draw a lot of oil to the point where when they built the breakwater, they had subsidence, and the waves breached the breakwater during a storm, and they were able to sue for a couple $1 million for damages. But I think we're kind of at the fringe of the oil field.
Right, we're at the very far edge of the Torrance oil field. We're at the very far edge of that field. So the just below the ground during the 30s, they were able to get some. But again, that was one of the complaints in the 30s, and one of the things that even the proponent of further drilling said is, look, yields are so low that even if we let people drill, there aren't going to be that many wells, was his argument. So yes, there is oil here. The amount debatable, the amount in the tidelands especially debatable.
Yeah, and what needs to know is that 32 wells that were going to be in the city yard were all slant drilled out to the Torrance oil field in the bay.
Exactly.
And again, that's when the tidelines and how much money was really going to come to Hermosa was minimal.
Speaking of the slant drilling, is there a reason for that? You mentioned early on that the wells were in the water and therefore the state said that money had to be shared more universally than just the cities. But if you slant drilled, was there an advantage to the fact that you were pulling the oil into the actual land as the city?
I think my understanding is if you're pulling the oil from that slant drilling out past the tidelands, that's considered tideland oil. It's not at the point of gathering, it's the point of extraction.
Which was the whole conundrum in Huntington as well, is that they were illegally, they claimed to be tapping the oil from a pool just below them, when in the 30s they were angling those drills to get the tideland oil. So it does matter which pool you draw from.
Have we paid off that E&B $17.5 million, or we're still doing
We're
that?
like halfway right now. I think it was a 20-year bond. Does anybody know?
I've got the number.
750,000 a year.
The remaining principal balance is roughly $6.9 million.
So just like one house on the Strand, half a house.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.